What is up? Daniel here, back again with the Virtual Robotics Studio, and we are ready to start building and assembling the arm structure. So we need a lot of parts for today's build. We got most of them on the table here. We'll go through them really quick. We will be using 25 chain. We need about 10 feet of the 25 chain. And then this is on the bill of materials, but there are a few chain breaking tools, because we have to make this chain shorter, that let you kind of push the pin out and put it back in, and that's what we're going to need in order to attach them to these chain tensioners that we're going to be using. So I think you want to make sure you have this chain break tool or something similar. We're going to use 4 of these 24-tooth sprockets. This is the leftover hex shaft from that first cut we made after we measured across the entire robot and cut it off. This is the leftover piece. We'll be able to make 2 more parts from that today. We've got 2 of these hex washers or hex spacers that are going to fit basically on this shaft. And that's going to let us space things out just a little bit so that everything fits without rubbing together. We're going to use some more of the bearing blocks from Thrifty-Bot. We're also going to need the hub, the 1/2-inch hub that goes inside of these. And then for brackets, we've got 2 T's, 2 L's, 2 90-degree ones, and 2 of these piano, or these just hinges that we're going to use on the bottom of the arm. Then for hardware, we're going to need 6 of these 1032 bolts and 6 washers that will fit on them. That's going to help hold the shafts in place. We talked a little bit about that in the last video. Well, this time we're actually going to do it. To hold the hubs together with the bearing blocks, we're going to need 8 32 button head bolts. They have to be button heads, and these are 3/7/5 long, so 3/8 of an inch long. And then finally, we're going to need a bunch of rivets. All right, I think that's everything we need. So again, clear the table, and let's get started. Special thanks, as always, to Argosy and Everybot. All right, the first piece we're going to make is our arm driver link. And so this piece is supposed to be, I think, about 21.22 inches long. So just under 22 1/4. So we'll tape measure it out. I think, as always, you want to check and see if there's some burrs and stuff on the end of your piece of metal. Mine has got some stuff here. So if I try to measure off that, it's not going to be accurate. So let's clean that off with a file. Now we can measure 21.22. Just under 21 1/4. And we'll bring the square in. Get ourselves a line. And double check, because we can't uncut. All right, perfect. Right on the edge of that line is where I'm looking to cut. Yeah, it looks pretty close. You can see 21, just a hair under 1/4, so that's going to be close enough for us. Let's go ahead and clean this up. That one looks good. Now we need 2 of these. So we are going to go ahead and I'm going to use the first one to mark my second one, because I want 2 that are exactly the same length. So we got to clean this edge off so we can measure from it. And same technique as before. I'll just kind of square them up to each other. We'll come over to the other side and mark it in. going to try to just barely remove the line. All right, looks good. See how we did. That is basically the same length. All right, so both of these parts are now cut to the right length. Let's label them so we can keep track of what they are. And I believe these are 03 because they're part of the ARM subsystem. And these are called the ARM driver link. And there are two of them, and they are the same. ARM driver link. All right, let's get this cleaned up a little bit, and then we'll mark them. We got to put a pretty big hole on one side. The next step is we are going to end up putting a hole, 1 1/8 inch hole, and we need to be 1 1/4 inches in from the edge of the piece. So we'll go ahead and mark these. We'll mark them one at a time. And earlier, when we built our frame, when the frame was all bolted together, we needed to make sure the holes lined up. In this case, we can drill the holes first because we're going to attach them to the frame and then connect them together once they're already in place. So if our holes are slightly off when we build these parts, that's okay. It's still going to line up and work. So first step is we are going to take the calipers, and I'm going to go to that 1.25 inches. So we're going to be at 1.25, and that's going to be somewhere around here. So let me get myself a nice line right around there so we can scribe into it. And I'm just going to go ahead and scribe a line right along that whole edge. All right, so that's our 1.125 or 1.25, 1 1/4 in from the edge of the piece. Then, if you remember when we used these bearing blocks before, we can put kind of two of them on. The hole, the big hole in the center, is not in the same place. So remember, we have these. You can see these holes are not lined up. That's how much off-center this is. So we need to shift the hole a little bit up or a little bit down on this piece. And it doesn't matter which way we do that right now because we can reorient the piece later when we attach it. But we're not just going to put another scribe line in the middle of this one. Instead, I'm going to set my calipers not to 1 inch because half of this is about 1 inch. Instead, I'm going to set them to 0.94. So we're at 0.94, and that you can scratch from either side because, again, if we want it to be high up, we'll attach it this way. If we want it to be low down, we could attach it that way. So since we can still flip the piece around, it doesn't matter which side you measure from, but we'll go ahead and scribe another line right there. And that point where they cross is where we want to drill. So I'm going to get my snap punch right on the cross and give it a little snap. Remember, if you're a little bit off, like I'm a little bit too far this way, I can kind of angle the snap punch a little bit and walk back over towards the center. And that looks pretty much on the cross, so I'm happy with that one. All right, we have one marked. We're going to make two of these. They're going to be exactly the same, so we've got to mark our second one. So let's go back to 1.25. And again, I'll get a little mark here so we can see it easily. Whoops. That one got away from me. There we go. and then back to 0.94 for the other direction. And then let's get the snap punch. Yep, that one looks pretty good. All right, so our pieces are marked. We've got our snap punches. We've got to head over to the drill press and put a hole through. Okay, so to get a 1 1/8 inch hole, I'm going to use our big step drill bit that we used earlier. And that was, I think we did a 1 1/4 inch hole last time. So 1 1/8 on my step drill bit is the first white line there. So that's good to know. But the problem is, I can't just drill this from one side, because if I keep going through to get the bottom up to the right size, the top is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you have a step drill bit that's exactly 1 1/8 or 1.125 inches on the biggest size, you could drill all the way through. But I don't have that. So we're going to have to drill from one side until it's the right size, and then we're going to have to flip the piece over and drill from the other side until it's the right size as well. And just to make sure the hole stays lined up on both sides, the first thing we're going to do is just drop a hole all the way through, and we'll use that to align our bigger holes. So I'm going to start with a 3/16 drill bit, just because that's what we use for rivets and bolts, and that's just what I have around. So let's go ahead and get that into our drill press here. And again, this is a hole that you could do by hand, but it's a lot better if you can make this hole very, very straight. So the drill press is the best option. All right, let's get that tightened in. And before I go too far, I'm going to see if the hole or if the step bit is going to also work. I think we got to get a little bit higher up. We want to be kind of as high up as we can be on the table here. So if I put one of our pieces of metal in, again, always want to check and make sure there's nothing that it's going to be sitting on, because we want it to sit nice and flat. And I'm going to line up the hole I'm drilling in the middle so I don't drill into the vise if possible. And yeah, we can get a little bit taller here. We'll get right next to it. That looks good. Then hopefully we won't have to adjust this again when we switch drill bits. Lock the table down. All right, and this is the same technique we talked about before, but if you're off a little bit, we're trying to line it up. If you're off a little bit, when you sort of pull down into the hole or into the snap punch mark that we made, you can see the drill bit sort of deflect a little bit or bend a little bit to go into the hole, and that will let you know you're not quite where you want to be. So if you try that and you don't see it moving at all, look at it from the other side as well, because you might not be able to see it moving front and back. This is looking just about in the right spot to me. So I'm going to go ahead and clamp it in place here. We'll see if it moves. You just got to check, because when you clamp stuff in, it can move on you. And yep, that moved a little bit. So we'll try to line it up again. Oh, that definitely moved. I saw that one move. All right. One more time. Okay, and it might take some time to get it lined up, but that's okay. You want to make sure you get it in the right spot. That's the most important thing. All right, that looks good again, so we'll try to gently lock it in place here. All right, and that is looking good for me, so let's go ahead and turn it on. I'm going to turn my speed back up because I think the last thing we did on this was a hole saw, or was one of our step bits, and let's drill. We're going to drill straight through all the way. All right, so that step is done. Let's go ahead and get our other piece started with the hole all the way through. And I'm not sure really what the best way to do it is. We might have wanted to switch drill bits and finish the first piece, but it's kind of just whatever you think is the most efficient. Sometimes changing the tool takes longer than changing the part. So we're going to have to adjust this one to get it in the right spot. Okay, that looks good. And in theory, right, if the vise is clamped in the right spot, I should be able to just get to the same spot here by sliding back and forth. If you can't do that, if it looks way off, you might have your other piece facing in the other direction, because remember that hole is not in the center. Let's go a little bit more over. Yep, that looks good. Let's drill it. Okay, and now we do have to switch drill bits, so let's see if we can take this out without moving the piece out of the way. So we'll open it up all the way. Yeah, okay, that one comes out. Can this one go in? Yeah, perfect. So the nice part about this is since we switched the tools, but we haven't moved our part, it should be still perfectly lined up because that's exactly where we just drilled a hole. So we are ready to go, except anytime you're doing the hole saw or the step bit, let's get some oil on it. And when I turn this on, I'm going to turn the speed back down all the way. I'm going to go to the slowest speed that my drill press can do. All right, and if you do have the same kind of drill press, I think it tells you to only change the speed when it's running. That's why I had to turn it on to do that. Now, we are going to be aiming for the first of the white lines here. So there's 3 in a row. There's one way down, and then there's 3 in a row, and we're aiming for the first white line there. That's when we want to stop drilling. Let's give it a shot. I think it's one more, but I want to double check because you can always do more and can't do less. Yep, one more. Okay, so this side is good. Take this out. And again, we got to make sure to clear this off. Again, I don't have one, but like a paintbrush is really good for just sweeping all those chips off safely and quickly. All right, so the first side is done. Now we want to flip this over. But remember, this wall has the right dimension, right? The distance from this wall in and this wall in are not the same. So I want to keep this same wall on the back side here. So in this case, if I flip it over like this, then that's going to keep the same wall there. So the hole should be able to line up without me moving the vise. We will see if that is true. That looks pretty true. All right, so we'll go ahead and just basically pushing this in as far as it'll go. That'll help align it. and then I will go ahead and tighten the vise down. And we can just kind of double check and see, yeah, that looks like that is pretty much centered in the hole. It's hitting evenly all the way around. So we'll add some oil. And then drill this one through. Again, not all the way through, just up until that 1 1/8 of an inch line. And I think that was it. Let's just move some of the shavings away and double check. All right. Yep, perfect. So this one is all good. And let's bring the other one up here. And once again, we're just going to try to line it up on the hole that's there. Maybe this is the wrong way for this one. Let's see if it's better this way. Oh, no, that's definitely worse. Okay, that does not look like it's lining up the way that I would want it to line up, so we are going to readjust the vise until it looks good. I think that's looking in the center. And we have our trick where you can spin this a little bit by hand and see if it's cutting evenly around the hole. That's pretty even. So I think we're ready to go. Just add a little bit more oil. And let's do it. Wait, I don't want to move that. I want to move this. All right. And once again, we're going to flip it over, but we need to flip it over so the back wall stays in the same place. And that should hopefully let us align on this hole again. Yep, there it is. Looks good. All right, so I think these pieces are ready for us to start assembling. You do want to check these holes. I think I'm going to deburr them a little bit, and then we'll assemble them together. All right, so sometimes the outside of the step drill holes are usually pretty good, but the inside can still be sharp, and sometimes you want to take care of that. So a deburring tool, if you kind of just tilt the angle up a little bit, you can knock that burr off the inside of the hole as well. That's much better. And also, if you haven't tried it before, you can still use the deburring tool on the inside of the aluminum box structure. So if you got some burrs in there that you want to clean out, you can just run the deburring tool around it like that. Let's get this one. Okay, so those are cleaned up and ready to go. Our next step is these bearing blocks and our hubs. We're going to start connecting them together. Now, all the bearing blocks are the same, so we just need to grab 2 of them for starters. And what we want to do is the bearing block, right, there are these posts that are standing up, and they're going to hug around our arm box when we put it together. And they're going to be right centered on this hole over here. So we're going to have 2 of these. We'll bolt them together. And that'll hold everything in place. But we also want to be able to take the hex shaft and drive the arm. So before we put bearings in these, and when we put the hex shaft through the bearings, it just spins in the bearing. But in this case, what we want to have happen is we want to have it so that when you spin this, let me flip that over so it lines up. Remember, they only fit one way. When we spin this hex shaft, I want the arm to actually rotate. And so that's what these pieces are for. These are hubs, hex hubs. So there's a hex hole in the middle, which will fit on the hex shaft. And then these will go into the hole we put on our arm and the hole that we have on our bearing block here. And so one of the things we're going to try to check is if this goes on nicely, then everything is drilled in the right spot. If, like mine, it just doesn't quite fit, we're going to have to just open that hole up a little bit, file that hole up a little bit to get it to work. All right, so that one is a little bit off center. It's going to be OK. And this one is perfect. This one drops on no problem. OK, so this one's good. And now the idea is if this bearing block, right, we're pinched together on here, it's now locked onto this arm. So if I put a hex shaft in here and rotate that hex shaft, the arm would have to turn. But it won't right now because that hub can still spin in the bearing block. So our next step, before we worry about making this hole right and fit, is to attach this hub to this bearing block. So once again, find the side where it's flat, where there aren't the steps, there aren't any of the recesses for bolts, and drop the bearing block into it. And on these bearing blocks, what you'll notice is there are 4 holes. And it's this hole, this hole, this hole, this hole, and this hole. If you look very closely in those holes, you will see that there are threads. So we can screw stuff into those holes. And if I turn this so that I have 2 holes kind of down towards the bottom, flat on the bottom, and 2 holes that are even and flat on the top, that should line up with where those 4 tapped holes were. And we're going to use these are 832 button head screws. So these are a little bit smaller than the screws we've been using so far. And to use those, you need a 3/32 hex key. And these are 3/8 of an inch long. And what we should be able to do is drop them in and just screw them into the bearing plate behind it. And we're going to do all 4 of these bolt holes. And on this one, tightening with the hex key, it's really fast when you have it sort of the long way in. But after you're done tightening it the long way, we want to make sure these stay nice and tight. So we're going to come back in and put the short side in and just really crank on it a little bit. Now, another good thing that you can do is if you still have your Loctite, definitely worth putting Loctite in these because we don't want them to come loose. So I'm just going to make these ones nice and tight. And that's one done. We've got to do 2 of those. So do the same thing a second time. All right, now that those are all in and nice and tight, we are ready to start attaching them to the arm. So this was my one that worked. we'll do that one second. We'll deal with one that didn't work first. All right, so on this one, right, we're going to pair up a hubbed one with a non-hubbed one. And I got a hubbed one and a non-hubbed one over here. We've got our longer, these are 1032 by 1.5 inch button head bolts. And we just got to find the direction that this wants to be, or that this is close to fitting in. Because remember, that hole, right, in this case, I can see that this center of my bearing block is nowhere near the center of the big hole that I drilled. So that means I probably have to flip it over. And now I can see that it is pretty close to the center, but I guess not exact. And what I'm going to do is kind of line this up over the hole and see if I can see where it is going to hit. Right? So same thing with our bearing block one, or the one with the hub. You can try to line that hub up and just see if you can get it to go. And this one looks like, and I'll spin it around just to make sure I have it the right way. Yeah, that way's way off, so it's this way. It looks like I need just a little bit more. A little bit more of the metal removed. So I can, this side actually goes in, no problem. These two will clear. This one has a gap here. So there's plenty of gap here. So the one that's not fitting is this side right here. That's the one that's running into my metal frame. So what that tells me is this side of the whole thing is the side that I need more space on. And we'll take that out. Let's check on the other side too. Will it go on the other side? Or is it going to be the same? Yep, so once again, I can see it's catching right here. So that is the side of the hole that we need to get a little bit bigger. So I could potentially go and hit it with the step drill again, but I don't want to do too much. So instead what I'm going to do is, just knowing that that side has to get a little bit bigger, I'm going to take my deburring tool and I'm going to run around just sort of that side of the hole a few times. Because I'm not that far off. If you're very far off, you might have to go back to the bigger size step drill bit and run it through. And if it's really far off, also you may have to remake the part. That does happen from time to time. But we'll do our best to save this one. All right, let's see. Did we make any progress there? I think so. I'm going to work a little bit more on the whole bottom half of the circle now. And it's probably OK if it's easier for you to just go all the way around. That's OK too. We just need to move it a little bit. You can also, if you don't have a deburring tool, if you have a round file, you could file it for a little bit with a round file. And there it is. That's all it took. So now that's dropped on perfectly, and we will be able to connect everything together. But actually, I think I just realized we need not 2 hubs in these. We need hubs in all of them. So let me grab 2 more of those hubs. There they are. So let's get 2 more attached. We're going to have a hub on either side. So once again, find the flat side, drop the hub in. Line up the 2 holes. We'll get our smaller number 832 screws, and we just get these 2 attached really quickly. And one more. Okay, now we can try to attach it. But we might need to fix the other side of the hole to get the hub to match. In this case, we do not. It goes in no problem. So let's go ahead and start bolting this one in. Oh. What is happening? Okay, so it looks like it's a little bit too close together. So the head of my bolt is rubbing against this hub in the middle. And I could probably just force that on, but let me show you how I would take care of that if I didn't want it to hit. So let's see, these bottom two bolts look like they're both going to hit, but I could do the second top one here, or at least top as I'm holding it now. So that'll keep everything together. And let me grab a couple things. So if the bolt head is a little bit too close, that means the head of our button head bolt here is a little bit too big. So maybe yours won't hit if you got slightly different bolts than we have. But one thing you can do is if you just chuck that up into your drill, we would normally file it this way, but instead of having to file around everything manually, what we can do is turn the drill on. But we want to make sure that it's spinning towards us. So when I put the file on top, it's going to be spinning around into the file instead of spinning away from the file. So let's see, if I'm on forwards, that is the right direction. That is spinning around towards me. So I want the drill on forwards if I'm holding it in my left hand. If you're holding it in a different way, just make sure the top of the bolt is coming towards you. And all I'm going to do is turn it on, and I don't have to push down hard. I'm just going to sort of run the file back and forth along it while the drill is spinning. And that should knock the outside edge down enough that it won't rub anymore. All right, let's see if that was enough. Yep, perfect. Clears right in, no problem. So you know what? We're going to need a second one, and then we're going to need 2 more of these that are kind of filed down. So let me go ahead and make 3 of them filed down for a total of 4 really quickly before we move on. All right, I just did 3 bolts really quickly, so I should be able to drop this other one in here, and then we should be good to go. All right, so again, I'm tightening these very evenly. I want to get them all close, and then I'm going to go back around now and make them all nice and tight. And one more check before we move on. You want to make sure that your hex shaft will still slide through both of these pieces. And if it doesn't, like mine, it's a little tight, what you can actually do is we can loosen up these bolts that we just tightened a little bit. And when they're loosened, everything should be able to move around just a little bit, and we should be able to get that shaft to go through. There we go. So now it's sliding through. Still a little tight. There we go. All right. So with that shaft in, and we'll do this on the next one too from the beginning. Now if we tighten the bolts down, we know the hexes are nice and lined up. So we'll go ahead and tighten down all of the bolts one more time. Okay, and hopefully this still slides out. Perfect. Okay, so this side is done. Now we're ready to go and do our second side. But before we do the second side, there's a couple extra things we have to watch for. And that is, remember, this hole is not in the center. But I guess it doesn't matter, right? Like if we build this one the wrong way, we can always flip it over since we're going to have hubs on both sides. So really, we don't have to worry about which side the hole is on until we go to attach it to the robot. So let's just see if we can get one of these plates to match on here. And I think it goes this way. So on this one, oh, yep, that one just doesn't quite fit yet. So we're going to have to do a little bit of deburring on this hole here until we can get it to fit. That is so close. I could probably force that on if I wanted to, but we'll just go around a couple more times. All right, a couple more times. Surely now. There it is. All right, so that's on. I think this side was fine. And what we're going to do to make sure, I mean, you can test first to make sure they're facing the same way, but also when we slide our hex shaft through, obviously if we have one facing one way and the other flipped around, it would never go. So get the hex shaft in, and with the hex shaft in, we can go ahead and put our bolts in. But what I want to watch for is, okay, so here is one of the ones that I filed down. So we'll put that next to the hub. And here is one I did not file down, so I'll put that over here on the opposite side. If there were a big difference, like in terms of, since I think we can force the bolt in without filing it down, I think I would not worry about making everything work. But you do want to think about if you're at the competition and something breaks and you have to disassemble this and reassemble it, is keeping track of which bolts are filed down and which ones aren't going to be a problem for you. If it is, then you could just file down all of the bolts, and then it doesn't matter which one goes in which hole. But we'll just move ahead with what we've got right now. Okay, it's a little tight, but we'll see. So this is the one that needs the file down bolt, and this side has lots of space. All right, we want to make sure that that shaft can still go through, which it does. It's a little tight. Tight is OK as long as we can get it to move. OK, and so at this point, we can tighten the rest of the bolts down all the way. And if loosening up these 4 outer bolts does not get you to the point where the shaft will move, then the next step is to actually loosen up the center 4 bolts so the hub can get loosened up, and you can realign the hub until it moves freely. All right, this one it's tight, but it is moving. So we can take it out. All right. So our 2 arm sections are ready. Our next step then is to attach these to the robot. All right, it's time now to take our arm drive links and attach them to our frame. They're going to go on, we had these bearing plates up here at the top, and we had a 1/2-inch hex shaft all the way through everything to make sure it was lined up. And now we can attach each of these arm links. We're going to put one on this side and one on this side. And the easiest way to assemble this while they're kind of all apart is if you take your leftover 1/2-inch shaft from what we cut on the bottom of the robot. We're going to slide it in a little bit. And we need a little bit of space here, because if we slide this in directly on it, these little bolt heads are going to rub against the other bearing plate here. So instead, what we're going to do is grab one of these hex spacers. It doesn't have to be a hex spacer. You could just get a washer that was big enough around to fit on this. It could be a round plastic spacer that fits around it. But we need about a 1/16 of an inch of spacing here. So we're going to grab this and slide it all the way on right until it's touching that bearing. And then we're going to take one of our arm links and slide it on as well. All right, and if I bring these over now, what you should see is, first of all, turning the hex should make the arm spin. And what you really want to see is there should be nothing rubbing. It should spin nice and freely like this, even if I push in on this, because that spacer is in between, giving us enough space so it doesn't hit anything. It's going to spin nice and freely. If yours doesn't spin freely, you want to check to make sure that all of your bearings are still good and make sure you have that spacer in there, in between. All right, now, one more piece is going to go on the outside of this, and that is the 24-tooth sprocket here. So we can slide that in until it's touching. And this is the width we want this shaft to be. So we're going to end up, remember we tapped the last one, we're going to end up tapping this one and putting some screws in to hold everything together. So what I want to do on the inside is I want to push this shaft until it is flat on the inside arm. And that might be easier said than done. Not too bad. All right. So we're going to make that just perfectly flat. We'll slide it in until it's touching, slide the sprocket in. And then once again, I think we scratched a line before with the snap punch. Another thing that works really well is if you just have a razor blade, you can go right against the gear, and you can just sort of go back and forth a little bit, and you'll see it will scratch a nice clean hole there. I'm going to do 2 surfaces just so I have a couple of places to look at. Just back and forth. You don't have to push down too hard. All right, and now, once we have that mark, we're going to disassemble it. So we'll see which way it comes apart the easiest. Okay, don't lose your spacer. And this dimension now is where we have to go cut this piece. And I guess, yeah, we should go cut it and come back so we don't mix up the sides. So that is for this side. This side right here we just did, that is where this shaft is going to go. So let's head over to the saw, make a quick cut, and then we'll be back at it. Okay, the only thing we have to keep in mind is I don't want this cut too short, because if it's too short, stuff's going to be hanging off the end, and when we go to tighten those bolts in, it'll actually be squeezing everything together and adding a little bit of friction. So I'm going to make sure to leave that line, because that line was right up, since we used the razor blade, it was right up next to the edge of the sprocket where we were measuring. So I'm going to cut right on the other side of the line, and you see here, just turn this a little bit, and away we go. All right, so again, I'm just going to file on this a little bit. If it's very crooked, you might want to file more. My cut came off pretty straight. Again, if you have the chop saw, it probably would be a better saw to use for this. So just give it a little bit, or you can go to the grinder. But if it is crooked, it actually is still going to work just fine. So we'll file this down a little bit. And then we are going to just reinstall everything that we just did. So we'll slide this through. And remember, if you can't get it to slide, holding the inside of the bearing will stop it from spinning, so hopefully you can get stuff to line up. And I'm going to put the spacer on there. And then let's grab our arm. And now, this time we put the arm on, there are 2 different ways that we can put the arm on here. So you can see if I slide it on this way, the brackets are even all the way across. They're both the same position. What I think we actually want to do, if possible, when I looked at the model, if we flip it over and slide it back in, now do you see how the inner arm is a little bit lower than the outside frame one? And that's the way that it is in the model, so that's the way we'll go ahead and attach it. I don't think it's going to matter too much if you have it flipped one way or the other, but we do want to make sure that our 2 sides are the same so that they line up. All right, and if you can't get it to go lower, if it's only even or higher, you should go even. So lower is the best choice, even is the next best choice here. All right, and then remember we want to push this shaft so that it is flat with the edge of the arm over here. Then we should bring the sprocket in on the other side, and that should also be pretty flat. We should be seeing just about the edge. So I left maybe a little bit too much, and if you go in and you see, hey, there's a little bit more than you want there, you can take that to the grinder or file it down until it's nice and perfectly flat. All right, we have one more step to do here, though. We check this, everything is working, but we have to tap these hex shafts before we use them. So I'm going to take this back out. I'm going to leave the hex shaft on this side, just so I remember it was on this side that I put the shaft in and measured it. Now, they probably are going to be exactly the same length, but it's always nice to know, like, we measured it on this side of the robot, so it should stay on this side of the robot. I want to tap them both together, so let's set up the other side and get a measurement on the other side so that we can have both of them ready to go. So let's go ahead and get this one in. All right, and I'm going to keep my arms lined up with the side I did them on. You could label it, but since I'm going to have everything put together here in a second, I don't think I need to. But so these 3 pieces are for this side, and these 3 pieces are going to be for this side. So let's put our spacer on, and we'll slide this on. Push that over until it is nice and flat. Okay, and again, I'll check this side. It is spinning nice and freely, so we are good to proceed there. Slide in the sprocket, and we'll go ahead and mark our line again. Okay, and then, of course, disassemble. And we go cut this one. We definitely do want to file the edges so that it slides nicely through all of our hex-shaped holes. So hit all of these. And I think the other side was good, but do it again just in case. All right. Now, we needed to go ahead and tap these 2 hex shafts. So I'll bring it over to the vise again. Remember when we were tapping, it's nice to have something that holds it nice and sturdy, nice and straight as well. Okay, and let me grab the tap. And of course, we want some cutting fluid for this. So we get some cutting fluid on the hole, get some cutting fluid on the tap. And as a reminder, right, you want to get the tap as straight as possible when you get started. I like to look from both sides, and you're just kind of gently turning it to get it started. Make sure it's straight before you go too far in, because if the threads are crooked in the hole, you're only going to be able to put your bolt in so far. Okay, that looks good. And usually you can turn it a few times at the beginning. And then once you really get into it, what you want to do is turn it forwards a bit, and it'll start getting harder to turn. And when it starts getting hard to turn, back it off a half turn, quarter turn, half turn, and then go forward a bit, and then back, and then forward. So we're trying to break those chips out. And if it ever feels really hard, just back it up a little bit. Don't force it because you can break the tap, and then it'll be stuck in your part forever. Okay, and also just like the last one, we're going to be putting in these 3/8 long bolts. So we really only have to tap that far down. Actually, a little bit less because we're going to have a washer on top. So you don't have to go too far in. Just make sure you go far enough. You can always put the tap back in afterwards if it wasn't far enough. And I think we're probably good on this one. So I'll do one more forward one, and we'll back it out. And we can test it, see if that bolt screws in. Sometimes the first time you screw the bolt in, there's still going to be some bits of aluminum and stuff in there, so it might not be easy to put in with just your fingers, but it should get better over time. And I can see I can tighten that down until it gets basically next to it. It's going to be more than the washer that we're going to put in between. So that hole is deep enough, is tapped deep enough. All right, that was one side of this hex shaft. Now we have to flip it over. And we're going to do the other side of it. And then after we do the other side of this one, I'm going to go ahead and put this one back in the robot, and then we're going to do this one. So it's going to be a minute of tapping. All right, so we finished tapping this one, put it back in the frame of the robot. Now I've got the second one finished. That was for this side of the robot. So let's go ahead and do our final assembly here. So again, we put the shaft in. Get our spacer, put the spacer on the inside here. Then we take the arm, and we're going to line that up and slide it on. Remember, if I bring the bars even, right now my bearing blocks are even. That's not what I wanted, so I'm going to flip it around and put it back on. And now it's a little bit lower. The inside bearing block is a little bit lower than the outside one. Again, don't think it's going to make that much of a difference, but we'll get it the way it was shown. And then the sprocket goes on. With the sprocket, make sure you have the hub facing in, because we're going to put a chain on here, and if you put it this way, there'd be no room for the chain to fit, and it would hit our rivet, and all kinds of other bad things would happen. So the hub goes in first. All right, and again, we're basically even. I'm sticking out maybe less than a 32nd of an inch on each side. And now we need to put something on here to stop this from being able to fall apart. And that is a job for those short little bolts that we talked about earlier. So we've got two 1032 bolts, and we've got two washers. And the key with the washer is you just need to find a washer that is a little bit bigger than the shaft, than this hex shaft. So you can see if I set the hex shaft down on it, we can see bits of the washer, hopefully, poking out around the edges. It doesn't have to be a lot extra, just a little bit past is going to hold everything in place. So if you had a little bit of a bigger washer, that would be fine. Smaller than this, I don't know, it's getting pretty close. So probably at least this size. And of course, the one on the bill of materials does work. So I'm going to put the bolt through the washer, and then we're just going to screw it in to the end of the shaft here. And we'll take that down all the way until it's tight. And now what you can see is there's no way for this sprocket to fall off because it's going to hit that washer and it can't move. And if we do the same thing on the inside, there will be no way for the arm to fall off and everything will be held together. So washer on the bolt, and let's get that screwed in. Okay. I'll move and get a better angle. Tighten this one all the way in. And you can hold on to the arm here to have something to tighten against so it doesn't go swinging on you. That's nice and tight. And you can see there is a tiny bit like this. If I push all of the shaft out to one side, there's about that much play in it, which is very, very little, a couple sheets of paper. And that's perfect. So everything can stay nice and loose, swing nice and freely, but nothing can fall off. All right, this side's done. Let's do the same thing on the other side of our robot. So slide this shaft in. Let's get our spacer on. And then let's figure out which way the arm needs to go. So if I slide it on this way and line it up, they're even. So again, I did it upside down. So I'm going to flip it over. And now this one is a little bit lower. Right? And that's important because we're going to connect these two arms together across the back. And if one is a little bit higher and one is a little bit lower, it still probably goes together, but it's not going to be as nice and square as we want it. All right, push this through just a little bit more. So it's about flat on my arm here. Bring in our sprocket on the other side. And then one more time, we're going to do the bolt and the washer. And go ahead and screw that in to hold it all together. All right. We are just about ready to move on to the next step. I do want to warn you about one thing. We might do things like rest these up here when we're working on them so we can access them easier. I might put something along here to hold them in place. But just be aware, if you're kind of looking underneath here working on the robot and this gets bumped, it's going to whack you in the head. So keep an eye on where these things are. And know that you're not in that position because they will fall pretty quickly. All right, now our next step then is going to be making that crossbar to connect these together. And our question is, how big does that crossbar need to be? And it all depends on how big this section of the arm was, how big your spacer was that you ended up using. And so what we really want to do is we just want to measure how far it is across here and cut our crossbar to that size. So let's do that. So if we go right here and measure all the way across to the other side, I'm getting 14.5 plus maybe a tiny, tiny bit, plus maybe a 64th of an inch, maybe a 32nd of an inch. So just about 14.5 is what we want to make that bar. All right, so let's go grab the material. We'll mark it, we'll cut it, and then we'll get it assembled. All right, we've got our piece of 1x2 stock, 16th inch wall again. And remember, we just measured on the robot that our gap between our two arms, the arm driver links, was 14.5 inches. So we are going to measure 14.5 inches on here. And get a mark at 14.5. That looks just about on. To the very edge of that is where I want to be. Leave room for the Sharpie line. All right, that looks pretty close. Let's see. Let's move it over just a little bit. Okay, yep. So that'll be 14.5 if I get rid of the whole line. I want to make sure that my entire Sharpie line disappears when I cut this. And remember, this piece, if it's too long, could be a problem because we have those two swinging arms and they can only bend out so much before it's not going to work as well. If it's a little bit too short, that's kind of okay actually because there will just be a gap between the two pieces of metal, but we're still going to have those gusset plates on the top and bottom holding it together. So don't make it too long, but if you cut it and it's a little bit long, we can still file it or grind it, so you don't want to cut it way too short either. All right, we've got our mark. Let's get the saw out and make this cut. All right, our chop saw has magically appeared. Let's line it up and make our cut. All right, that looks good. Let's file up one edge and get a little measurement going here. 14 and a half, pretty much perfectly on. All right, so that's good. This piece will work. Let me finish filing it, and we'll go attach it to the robot. Of course, I forgot something with this part. It is not ready yet, and that is we need to label it. This is so this is 03 arm closeout. Let's all pretend I wrote closeout correctly the first time, and then let's not talk about it anymore. All right, so this piece, you can check. It should fit just about perfectly all the way up against these hubs. And then you've got the right length. If you can't fit it in here, then it's probably a little bit too wide. You might want to go ahead and file or grind it a little bit. But what you'll see is on the other end, it's very tight on that end. It's perfect on that end. The other end, there is some play here. So if you're just a little bit over and it fits kind of on this end, it's still going to probably be fine to use. All right, let's get started with how we need to attach this. So I want you to take note of the position of the robot. So the robot here is pointing kind of away from us if I stand facing the same way that you're facing. And we're bringing these link arms up. So this surface is the surface, if you hold it parallel, this surface matches, right? And I think for right now, it's kind of weird because it's the top, but when the arm goes out, it becomes the bottom. But we'll say when it's stowed, this is the top, and this is the top. And that is the side we want to be working on. So make sure you have yours set up that way. And there's a couple ways to do this. We're going to want room to clamp up here. So resting it on the table is maybe not the best way to do this. Another way you can do it is if you take a clamp here and squeeze a clamp in here. That'll kind of support it up in the air so we have something to work on. Now we can push on that pretty hard. Not super hard, but it's kind of staying in place for us. And this arm closeout is going to attach off of here, but it's not flush on the end. Instead, we're going to use these T-brackets. The T-bracket is going to be flush on the end, and then the arm closeout is going to line up with where that T-bracket is. So we can actually attach this first without having to clamp all of the pieces up together at the same time. So let me get some clamps on this individual T-bracket here. All right, and we want to slide that down so that it is flush on the bottom, or even with the bottom of our arm here. And then you want to make it nice and even on the side, and that is the spot. I'll get the clamp on. Just double check it. You can kind of tell when you slide this if it's rubbing. Really the best way here, though, is just to feel with your fingers. It should feel pretty even on the inside. It should feel pretty even on the back, and it should well, I don't know, the inside, the outside, and the back of the arm. All right, and let's get one more clamp on. Now, on this bracket, two of the holes we're going to save. We're going to attach a U-bolt to them at some point. So these two holes back here, we're not going to rivet. This hole and this hole, the two holes on the end of the arm. I guess I'll point to that one. It's under the clamp. But we're going to add rivets here, 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 and here. Well, obviously not here and here until we put the other box in, but you know what I meant. All right, so let's get some rivets in. So I'll start in the middle hole. That one for sure gets a rivet. And then we're moving up the arm towards our pivot, towards our bearing blocks, towards the hubs, towards the end of the robot. That next hole we can do as well. All right, and I got to remove this clamp so we can get the last hole here. All right, that is good. And we'll drill these 2 holes. Remember, we're only going through one wall of the box, not all the way through, but we'll drill these 2 holes, but we will not put anything in them. Perfect. All right, next step, we're going to do this on the other side. So we'll lower this one down, and I will swing the other one up. I'll go ahead and get my clamp on there. Make sure it's high enough that I can fit my other clamps. Perfect. All right, and once again, we want this T-bracket, again, pointing towards the middle, pointing towards the other arm. The T-bracket should point towards each other. And we're just going to make it flat on all the sides here. And just kind of pushing it until it looks good. That looks good. Tighten that one down. Get another one out here. Tighten that one down. And I'm going to do something here, which is when I'm pushing over here to drill, I'm trying to help hold it with my hand, but the clamp is not, I can't push very hard. But when the clamp was on the table, I could actually push pretty hard into the clamp because that's supporting it. So I'm going to lower this down onto that clamp, and then I'll tighten this one up here again. So now I can push pretty hard when I'm drilling. All right, and we'll do all 3 of these holes, but no rivets in. No rivets in this hole or this hole. We're going to go up the arm. Start in the middle and go up the arm. Hey, you got to put it in the hole that you drilled out. That works better. Okay, that was already used rivet. All right. And that is a do not rivet hole. And then we can open this clamp up. And we got one more do not rivet hole to do here. All right. Now we're coming back with our arm closeout, and we're actually going to get that all attached to the robot here. So I'm going to do another clamp on here just to kind of keep stuff close. So this arm closeout, it's going to be tall the same way that the side ones are, so we're going to attach it so that it is the same height. And then the 1 inch is going to line up with the 1 inch stuff. And what we want to do here is we just want to try to square everything up as we clamp it into place. So I'll get a clamp started. And for this one, we just need 1 clamp on each side. So let's get a clamp started on this side. And again, what we want to do is kind of line that up so that it is even with the box. And we want to start with this one lined up so it's even with the box too. But I'm not going to tighten these clamps too tight yet because we are probably going to have to adjust it a little bit. So now what we want to do is we want to come in with our square and see if it is square or not. So this side is very much not square. How about this side? This side is getting pretty close to square, actually. All right, so that means, I think the way this one is, we want to slide this piece forward a little bit, if we can. And so we might not be perfectly on the bracket, and that is okay. Let's check again. Okay, so square would be pretty far away. That's just about there. But then here, this one is getting worse. So we have to just sort of split the difference. We can't make both sides the way that we would want them to look. So I'm just going to minimize the amount that we are not square. And that actually is getting pretty close to lined up on these brackets. So I'm going to tighten this down. Make sure this one's tight, and I'll check one more time. So this one's off by a little bit, and this one is off by about the same amount. And they're off in opposite directions, so I can't adjust them both to make it square. So make it as close as you can, and then we are ready to attach this piece. So I'm going to drill and rivet both of the holes, including the one under the clamp. So we'll get one going first here. Again, I have my clamp on the table, so I don't have to support it underneath. But if I didn't have that, you want somebody to be holding on this. Not over where they're drilling the hole, but over where it's safe. All right, let's pop a rivet in that one. And let's go ahead and do one on the other side, because we can reach it. All right, and now, actually, since this is riveted in two places, this beam is not going anywhere. Our closeout here, our arm closeout. And so what that means is I can actually take both clamps off, and it's going to be OK. It can't shift on me. So let's do the last two holes. All right, so this top side is good. We may come back and put our U-bolts in here. But first, let's finish attaching the other side of the arm. And I think the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to flip this up to the top. And we're going to be working up here on this surface. One of the things I want to not have happen is, again, this still swings nice and freely. I don't want this to fall down while I'm working on it. So I'm going to take a clamp across. Where am I going to put it? I'm going to put it maybe here and just kind of squeeze that in. This kind of doesn't move now. Maybe it's actually better. Let's try to get it up here. It's probably better up here. If we can, that diagonal bracket in the front. All right, there we go. So now I've changed my mind. I want it facing this way so I don't poke myself with the tail of the clamp. All right, but now though, this isn't going to move on us while we work, so it's a little bit safer. And we have to set up the top and our second gusset plate that we're going to use here. So in this area where we're working, we have to be able to attach this 90-degree gusset plate here to help hold stuff together. And I think there's plenty of room for us to do that, but also we're going to be attaching this hinge up here. And it looks like there is a decent amount of clearance as long as the gusset plate is nice and flat on the bottom. So we could probably do this in either order, but I think the position of the hinge is more important than the position of this gusset plate. Because if I move down a little bit, we're still good. It's still going to do everything we want it to do. So let's attach our hinges first. And I think the way we want to attach this hinge is so that you kind of see it bends around. We've got the circle bit here on the side. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make this into a 90-degree angle and just rest it on top. And you can kind of find the angle if you move to the side, right? That top section is going to be resting on the side of the box. That's the angle I want. I just want to have it slid over so it's right in the middle at that angle. So a position just about like that. Let me see if we can get one of these clamps on down here to get it started. That's working pretty well. Now, if I started drilling, it might rotate this piece. You can see that it still rotates back and forth. So I'm going to try to get another clamp on the top to stop it from doing that. I think we can use a little 1-inch clamp for this. Yep, so we'll just go right on the sides here. And now that can't move, looks good. And actually, we're going to attach this the same way we've been attaching all of our gussets. We're just going to drill a hole and put a rivet in. So another 3/16 hole here. And be careful, right, because we drilled on the other side of this, we drilled a hole here, which means when you pop through that hole, your drill bit could come through the other side. So I almost just did it. So I'm going to kind of hold it below my clamps here to help support it. Then we can go ahead and drill this hole. And like I said, it's just pop a rivet in. Make sure you get the rivet nice and in there, though, before you start closing it. And you'll see once it goes in, it looks like it was meant to go there. OK, and we'll take the bottom clamp off now so we can get to the second hole. And we'll drill that hole in. And again, this hole will go all the way through, so watch your hands. One more rivet. All right, that looks good. And we can do a quick test. If I grab a piece of scrap metal, what we want to be able to do is have this piece, right, be able to rotate all the way forward and all the way backwards without hitting. And what can happen is if your hinge is too low down, you might not be able to have it rotate all the way back as far as we want it to rotate back. Okay, and that's why as long as you get this 90-degree angle, I think you have all of the motion that you could possibly want, and it's going to be great. So this hinge looks good. Let's do the hinge on the other side. And it's exactly the same process. All right, hinges look good. And now we know for sure where we can put our angle brackets without getting into trouble. So switch back over to this side. And we're going to look at putting our 90-degree gusset plate here. OK. And again, it doesn't actually matter where this goes. As long as we're getting rivets on both pieces, it's good. But the best thing we can do is line it up so it's flat with this piece, and it's flat with this piece. And yeah, that's going to make it look as pretty and be as strong as we can possibly make it. Just a few more turns there. That feels good all the way around, so we'll tighten this clamp. One more clamp on this side. Still feels good. We are ready to go. Now, this one hole in the middle here, this hole, you can see is on the seam between the two pieces. So we're not going to drill and put a rivet in that hole. We're going to skip that one. Last one. All right, same thing on the other side. Skip that one. Okay, so we have both of our angle brackets on. We've got our hinges here ready to go. I think we're going to save the U-bolts and the chain for the next video, so we're going to call this good for now. But a lot of progress here with this arm. One more reminder, right? This is going to be swinging. It's getting heavier and heavier the more pieces we put on it. So you probably don't want to leave it up like this without a clamp on it. So I'm going to lower it down so it's in a little bit of a safer position. And that's it. Great job with today's work. We'll see you in the next video. And before we go, as always, special thanks to Argosy and Everybot.